to start out with a reminder, and the reminder comes from Proverbs 2, 1 through 11. And because Peter is my mentor and keeps me on the straight and narrow, and I listen to him. I love to listen to him read the word. So Proverbs 2, 1 through 11.
And I actually love this passage. It is so powerful. My son, if you receive my words and treasure my commands within you, so that you incline your ear to wisdom and apply your heart to understanding. Yes, if you cry out for discernment and lift up your voice for understanding, if you seek her as silver and search for her as for hidden treasures, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk uprightly. He guards the paths of justice and preserves the way of his saints. Then you will understand righteousness and justice, equity, and every good path. When wisdom enters your heart and knowledge is pleasant to your soul, discretion will preserve you, understanding will keep you.
Thank you, Peter. And I'm going to ask you one question as a follow-up on that. When you said that's one of your favorites, particularly as it relates to you, why?
Several reasons, Dr. E. One is the intentionality that is so important on my part in order to really tap into the promises that God makes there. You know, there if then statements there, and it's a wonderful challenge. And then the promises are so rich that I want to do them, and I have to ask God really to help me to meet the standard. But it's so rich. I just love it.
Yeah. Guys, and the reminder, and before we got into any of this, he stores away sound wisdom for the righteous. Okay. He shields those who walk in integrity. He guards, preserves, protects his saints. Okay. And again, the beginning of wisdom, as we all know, is an understanding of God and how we align with him. And so as a reminder, I wanted to start out with this. Guys, if you'll go to slide 2, I want to show you where we've been. Week 1, we have crammed in several weeks of content into 3 sessions. And so week 1 is the reminder that Jesus was the most dominant figure in history. His model is solid. His model is perfect. Your model and man's model won't outdo his. And when we see ourselves rightly in light of who he is, that's the starting place. Then we move into week 2, how God's been saying this stuff for thousands of years, right? Modern research is proving scripture. Last time we compared and contrasted emotional intelligence with the mandates of scripture. We contrasted transformational leadership with scripture. This week, what we're now turning to is now when we see Jesus maybe more rightly, or are reminded of how we should see him and what the world has offered their solution, we can then begin to look at ourselves. And I use this illustration often when I'm talking about leadership and leaders that are filled and moved by the Holy Spirit. And I like to think of Christian leaders as a prism. And, prisms are those, they look like diamonds, and they refract light. We are a lot like that as people. I think we're kind of pretty. God made us pretty interesting, right? We look cool, but when the light of Christ hits that prism, color, life. I mean, if you look and you study what the role of a prism is, and you look at us, I love that analogy, because when we finally get a hold of what God is trying to lead us to, his lens, his perspective will magnify through us. And I think that's the key lens as we look at this. And so again, the Jesus model, as a reminder, is that we are not the center. We are not the sole reason for living as we know. We are second. Okay. Your playbook's been created, and it's perfect. It's good. And before we talk about any of that, I think it's key that we remind ourselves always of truth and where we come from. So if you guys will jump to slide 3, just as a recap, today's work's going to be a little bit more practical and tangible, but I wanted to set a little bit of a reminder. Okay, remember week 1, we had this acronym PTFAR. Our philosophies and our perceptions drive our thinking. So week 1, we talked about, how do we see God? What comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. Why? Because the way that we think, what comes into our minds, is dictated by a perception. It's dictated by a philosophy. Week 1 and 2, we talked about that. And now in week 3, I want to take that a little bit more on the thinking side and drill that down into who you are and how all this lines up. Okay. So again, PTFAR, reminder, the fear of God is the beginning of what? It's the beginning of wisdom. And so again, Proverbs 4:2-3, Proverbs 4:23, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. And another reminder, Luke 6:45, a good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart. An evil man brings out evil things that are stored up in his heart. For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. Okay. So again, there's a progression. Step 1, step 2, step 3. So a reminder of that. So guys, we're going to jump into little week 3. If you'll jump to slide 4. This is a quote from that. This makes some people really uncomfortable, actually. The quote comes from Frederick Buechner, or Buechner. He was a Presbyterian pastor. But I love this quote because he brings together 2 ideas that I think are really, really important when we're looking at purpose and identity and calling. And I want to ask you to think about this quote. The place that God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. The place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. Now, I've heard from some Christians and other people that this makes them nervous. They don't like this quote. And the reason that I hear is that it's this desire. And I tend to wonder if we've almost eliminated desire and longing and made it bad, right? Those things we want, those things we desire, those things that make us individually come alive. Where did that come from? Where were those desires? Not all desires are good. I get that. But when you think about calling and you think about purpose and you think about what God has destined and planned for you thousands of years ago, do you think he's going to put you into the world without the desire to do what he's called you to do? It seems a little convoluted, and he is a master at managing people. Os Guinness, I enjoy him. Os Guinness, he wrote in his book, Rising to the Call. He has this to say. He said, the great creator alone knows our reason for being and calls us into a life of purpose. As we human beings rise to the call of our creator, we become sub-creators, entering into our own creativity, artistry, entrepreneurship as made in his image, thus adding the rich fruitfulness of the universe. Answering the call of our creator is the ultimate why for living, the highest source of purpose in human existence, because it literally transforms us into entrepreneurs of life. Love that idea. He goes on to say that entrepreneurs of life use their talents and resources to be fruitful and bring added value into the world, quite literally making the invisible visible, the future present, the ideal real, the impossible an achievement, the desired an experience, the status quo dynamic, and the dream of fulfillment. And what he's referring to, guys, to the good works that Ephesians 2:10 talks about, is that we have been prepared to do here. You boil all that down to what Guinness says, and we boil all that down to the simple mission that we've each been entrusted with, and that God has crafted our character and given us a role to reveal something about it, right? John Eldredge, one of my favorite quotes from John, he wrote Wild at Heart, he wrote Sacred Romance, more on the Christian counseling side. He says, if a man does not find those things for which his heart is made, if he is never even invited to live for them from his deep heart, he will look for them in some other way. The place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. If you'll jump to the next slide, page 5. Guys, and working with so many leaders and business leaders and hearing what they're not trying to fake or try to keep it all together like I'm the greatest, but they really get honest. It feels a lot like what Thoreau is saying in this next quote, is that we live lives in quiet desperation. And I think often many of the people, secular clients that I have, that's the story of their life. However, in comparison, Jesus said, again, I've come and I'm going to give it to you to the full. I've designed you. I've created you. I've counted the hairs on your head. I know when you're going to rise. I know when you're going to die. I've given you gifts and talents. I've given you everything pertaining to life and godliness. I'm going to give you life to the full. I just need you to submit to this notion, right? And so I've not seen anything to disconfirm the idea that those who walk with Christ have a full life. Just haven't seen it. It's one of his stories. Guys, next slide, slide 6. Taking this down a little bit deeper and you think about what's your story? Okay. What's your story? Where were you born? Where'd you come from? Who were your parents? What were the bad things that happened to you? What were the trials? Where did you get your heart ripped out? Where'd you get your heart broken? The moments of your life that were the greatest moments of your life that you remember, all these are your story. And where you connect with people is at the story level. God sent scripture. He didn't send it via any other way but story. I mean, we're all reading the book. It's a story. It's a real story, but it's a story. We have our own story. Another thing that John Eldredge, and I agree with him, he said, our wounding, our hurts, our pains will always point to our calling. I want you to think about that, if you will. Our wounding, where we got hurt, some of the most painful things about us, about our story and our history, often points to our calling, right? And I think there's many, many ideas when we start looking at purpose and identity, we cannot separate where God has placed us, the things he has allowed into our lives, and what he's calling to. We can't separate those two. And so as it applies to your life and your story, think about history. Begin thinking about, what do you know? And we're going to dive into this really quick. So let's go to page 7. So that was introduction, you all. That was the longest preface in all of time. I'm a professor. I have to have long prefaces, I think. So here's what I want to ask you guys to do. Everything else in this workbook, if you will, that is numbered, by the way, this is for you to kind of take. What I want to do today is explain some of these exercises to you. These are things that in different ways that I use with business clients. Some of them I use with executive leaders who are like, I don't know what I want to do with the second half of my life, right? So again, these questions are used with paying clients that are trying to find the same areas that we're talking about today. And so guys, before we get too carried away, I want to start with just desire. We go back to that Fred Buechner quote, the place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. Let's try that on for size. Page 7. So question 1, what are you naturally curious about? What intrigues you? What do you read about at night when you don't have to? I've been obsessed with leadership since I was a kid. I've always been intrigued by it. Always been intrigued by people. What are you naturally curious about? I'll give you a little bit of time to think about that. I'm just begging you to find 1 or 2 things there, okay? Love what Judith put in the chat. Empowering women and developing leaders. Kaboom. Okay. What would you change about the world? You don't have to write a dissertation. You don't have to write a book on this. What would you change if you could? If you had all the money in the world, what would you go do? If you had all the power, what would you go change? I'd get rid of mean people. That's what I'd do. And I'll tell you, my Eastern African friends, I'll tell you this. What would you change about the world? If any thought comes into your mind and says, that's too big, that is not the Jesus we serve. That's not the God that we serve. He will bring about what his will and his intention is for you. It's okay to desire. It's okay to want to see this. Maybe he put it in there, maybe he didn't, but he will bring about. So again, don't let that's too big. Just hear it, feel it. You don't know why. Question 3, what would you do if you could not fail, if you were guaranteed success? It was a guarantee. Don't underestimate that 4th question on slide 7. What do you enjoy doing? Those of you with parents, or those of you who are parents, can you imagine sitting down with your most beloved child, looking them in the eyes and saying, I'm going to give you a job for the rest of your life that is an exact opposite of what you enjoy. My goal is to make you miserable. We're not even great parents sometimes, and we wouldn't do that. So again, what do you enjoy doing? It's okay. It's okay to enjoy things. Let's go to slide 8 real quick. Next slide. Next set of questions, I'm gonna run through there. What were the activities or tasks where you felt like, yeah, empowered, excited, you came alive? When I was 19 years old and in the Marine Corps, I used to go out on the weekends and hang out and chat with homeless people. Kid you not. I would literally leave base, go to San Francisco, and hang out with homeless people and just hear their stories. I was fascinated by it. I loved it. I don't know why I felt empowered. I don't know why I felt alive, but I did. So when you think about yourself, what makes you just feel alive? Guys, this next question about accomplishments in your life that you're most proud of. Okay. I'll guarantee what you're most proud of is going to be different than what most people are proud of. I promise you. It's going to be very aligned with what you deem as great, awesome, or good. So what have you achieved? What have you pulled off that you're proud of? The next question, great adventure. What great adventure? What do you want to do? What when you think about what's possible? I really want to climb Kilimanjaro. True story. That's where I want to start. I want to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. Why? I don't know. I just do. I want to do the Camino de Santiago from France all the way to Portugal. It's the way of St. James. I want to hike that. Why? I don't know, but it's something I want to do with you. What do you want to do? Write it down. What concepts, next question, what concepts, ideas, thoughts are you most inspired by? Right? Peter and I have conversations all the time, right? Most of them is me apologizing for giving Peter a hard time about being older than me. And, but the idea is that when Peter begins to talk about, for example, when he talks about righteousness, he lights up, he goes into a little bit, you guys have seen it, he goes into a little bit of a different mode when he's talking righteousness, right? I mean, he's about it. He wrote a devotional on it. He's passionate about it. He sees it. He gets it. I think God's given him a special insight into righteousness. Do you find it ironic that he's teaching this content? Of course not. His idea is this righteousness got a hold of his heart. It inspired him. It moved him. And then he began taking it out. So again, what are you most inspired by? I love that. Dora mentioned global trade on fair terms. Eradicate poverty and suffering in the world, Judith brought up. Wow, I feel alive when I empower someone else. Amen. That's, Judith, that's one of my things too. Stephen, eradicate corruption. High calling. And Peter won't be climbing that mountain with me. Oh, well, maybe we can get him to go. All right, guys, if you'll jump to slide 9. All right. So what Jim Collins said is he said 3 things come together. If you have these 3 things in business, you're going to be successful, right? Number 1, you can be one of the best in the world at that. You're really good at it. Number 2, you are insanely passionate about it. Makes you come alive. You love it. Number 3, people will pay you money to do that thing. That's Jim Collins' notion of hedgehog. When you think about that at the individual level, I will tell you, when I work with the most successful entrepreneurs, the most successful people who've done their own thing, it's always usually one passion. You know, you think about Warren Buffett. The guy reads technical articles on investments. That's like 5 hours a day. The guy's obsessed with that. Is it surprising that he's created one of the most powerful investment houses in the world? No. Right? It's endless, the stories about someone who grabs hold of a passion and an obsession. And so again, continue to think about, what is it that comes easily to you? What are you naturally gifted at? Another area that I think is really, really powerful is this idea of, what do people come to talk to you about? No one comes to me and talks about, I need a course on proper behavior. Like, I need to, like, how to handle yourself in a meeting. I'm not going to be that teacher, right? Or no one's going to come to me and talk to me about handyman stuff. Not going to happen. They're going to come talk to me about other things. So what do people come ask your input, your advice, your wisdom for? That's a tell. Again, guys, these are just really quick questions to begin trying to cultivate this, and I'll continue. But before I do that, I want to ask, are there any questions on just the passion identifier slides? Anything at all? If you do have any comments, throw them in the chat. I'll catch them, and we'll keep going. So I want to, if you'll jump to slide 10, and a little bit of an overview here. And we've all heard the saying, if you aim at nothing, right, you'll hit it every time. It's probably one of the most hackneyed, blasé quotes we've heard. But again, if you aim at nothing, you'll hit it every time. And so the question when we look at this is, what is your bullseye? What is your target? John Maxwell, who just a great thinker and a great leader, he said, people will summarize your life in one sentence. People will summarize your life in one sentence. Pick it now. So I want to ask you to do something really ridiculous. If you were given full autonomy to summarize your life in one sentence, statement, what would it be? I'm going to ask you to write that down. Listen, I've heard many people, when I've asked them to do this, will say, oh my gosh, I don't even know, right? I don't even know where to begin with that statement. Here's a couple things to spur the thought a little bit. Okay. Your bullseye is maybe things about what's wrong in the world that you want to make right, things that you want to change, create, improve, remove. It's, it can be the things that make you passionately yell, yes, that's what I want to do. That's what I'm talking about. I saw that passion with Judith when the first time I met Judith in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I saw her passion about empowering women. I was like, oh my gosh, this woman's on fire. And once you get a hunger like that, I know that people are they're gonna explode. This passion's a very, very powerful a powerful thing. Guys, as you think about that bullseye, that notion of what Maxwell said is people will summarize your life in one sentence. Just some reminders for you as you're thinking through this, and you'll spend more time on this if it's something that you're focused on. A couple things to keep in mind. Guys, your dream, your passion will be uniquely yours. Don't expect everyone to wholeheartedly embrace it. We all have stories about what we feel called or passionate to do, and many people don't think it's a good idea. Again, be specific. The more clearly you paint that picture, the more you're going to feel it. And again, guys, when you start thinking about passion and calling in your life and impact, you will feel that. So if you don't feel it, keep looking. I would encourage that. Okay, so let's jump to slide 11. Trying to keep going on this time, and I'm taking way too long. And so on slide 11, I want to ask you do you know your top strengths, your top gifts, top talents? I want to ask you, if you can you list 5 to 10 of them right now? List them out. Now, if you can add on this question, how do your passions, what we just did on passion identifiers, how do those align with your top gifts, your strengths, top talents? How did the passions and talents align? Just in you, we've talked passion, we've talked talents. Now, how do those come together? What about your weaknesses? If you're anything like me, you can probably rattle off 175 weaknesses, and you're like, okay, where are my strengths? I can pick my toenails really quickly. It's again, guys, your weaknesses, we all have them. Even the person that Jesus, God himself, chose to build the church on the back of had a lot of weaknesses. So really quick, we've talked about passion, talked about strengths, talked about weaknesses, talked about how those align. Now I want to ask you to go to page 12 really quick. And I just wanted to give you an overview of this. This comes from a friend of Peter and I's. He's a pastor in Louisiana, and he works with church leaders, specifically pastors. And his model on the leader blueprint was something I really liked. And the only reason I wanted to share this with you, you can go back and look at this at another time. It's pretty self-explanatory. But when you see at the very middle, he talks about the effective leader. We're on slide 12. And if you look to the right of the effective leader, you'll see in the bottom kind of that bottom right quadrant, your calling, your unique giftings, development, and you look over to the left, social intelligence, self-management, empathy. Again, top left, clarity of mind, emotions, intelligence, motivations, derailers, weaknesses, strengths. We are an amalgamation, guys. We are a casserole of a whole lot of things: belief systems, values, personality. And in looking at that, we really, first and foremost, need to understand what we've got. So if you jump to slide 13, if we had an entire day or an entire afternoon, we would go through this exercise. Again, guys, many people, our values and our beliefs, they will drive your actions. Okay, it just happens. We can't argue that. And the notion of what we feel so deeply, those are our values. It's how we see people. It's how we see situations. It's, some people get angry about things that others don't. It has so much to do with what they value and what they hold dear. So the way this process works, and again, guys, I'd love to go through this with you because it's a whole lot of fun, but you don't have to have me go through it with you. So if you go to page, or on page 13, first step is to go through and highlight, capture, identify your top 10 values or top 15 values. Okay. So these 3 pages are pretty common, pretty standard values across the board. The way that this works is you go through and you pick the top 15. And then say, okay, I'm going to knock my 5. I mean, if I had to knock 5 off or take 5 away, that's what they'd be. And then do that one more time, and then you'll have that down to your top 5 values. I can almost promise you that your list of top 5 values will not look much like most of your people that you're friends with or that you're in a relationship with. These are very specific to you. And so it's really, really important to see and understand that. Any questions on that at all, guys? Now, why do values matter? I'll tell you why. At least from my experience, people will violate what they believe. People will often violate what they know is right. But people rarely break away from their values and what they value. It's almost their lattice. It's almost their structure. They will not deviate from. And so one of the key steps in understanding calling and purpose and identity is what you really care about. Key point. Okay. 17, slide 17, guys. The work on Myers-Briggs has been an assessment that's been used for years. Statistically, it's statistically valid. The research on this has been top notch. It's been welcomed in the Christian circles. There's nothing theologically unsound, at least, that has been raised with it. So it's a pretty good assessment. What I'd like to do is maybe use me as a really bad example. And I want to show you how to get your score and then interpret these things, okay? And so once you get your 4 letters, okay, you'll be like, I'm an INTJ. I don't know if you've taken it yet, but one of my favorite documents that I've seen as it relates to this is on the next page. And again, this comes from Ken Boa, from Conform to His Image. And in the appendix, he lays out kind of this really nice schematic aligning the Myers-Briggs personality profiles out with some of the tendencies. And so what I did is I went through and I highlighted my particular score. So I'm an I. And so on introversion, you can look down that row, that column for you, and you can see where your preference is, right? I'd rather think about things than maybe take action on them. I like to think, okay? My world is inside, right? Inner world, inspiration, right? So my approach to the Bible, I like to study the Bible alone. I just do, okay? And so you can look at your individual Myers-Briggs score and kind of get some insights into finding spiritual path, okay? Next slide, page 19. Dr. Boa lays out again even more explanation of how our Myers-Briggs score plays into our spiritual journey, right? You look at awareness on page 19 and you look in special temptations and vulnerabilities. I love that row. That's my favorite. Primitive sensuality and psychogenic illness. Just what I wanted to know. Let's go to page 20. ENFJ. Oh, here it is. Her explanation is down at the bottom on the right grouping, the bottom left. Extroverted feeling with intuition. Motivates people, persuasive, natural leader. Yes, 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 yes. I've seen this. I saw it in class. I saw it the minute I saw her. People-centered spiritual orientation. Are you kidding me? Through and through. So this gives you some really neat insights into how you can show up. And then the final slide on page 21, this one's really, I enjoyed this one. I highlighted my NT temperament. So I'm going to be more like Paul, supposedly. NF. Pretty agreeable again, so you can begin to see. And then USJs. Do we have any SJs out there? Any SJs? You guys are the James. You know, you're structured, dominant, results, getting it the right way, right? Task oriented, a little choleric, can drive. There's a right way. And again, you can look at these temperaments and really see how these play out. And I think it's fascinating. I wanted to let you see that. Okay, real quick, I'm about to run out of time. Page 22. This link that I provided here, guys, this will give you, there's a free version and then there's a paid version that will give you a really robust description of yourself. Peter has recently taken the Myers-Briggs. Peter, can you put in a 30-second plug on any value that you may have seen in this at all?
Yeah, just in a word, it was absolutely accurate. And not only from the standpoint of how it, the perspective it showed me about myself, but then you actually forwarded me how you and I would likely relate based upon our results. And as I commented to you, I thought it was almost as though you had written it yourself. They seem so accurate as far as how we would interrelate. It was wonderful, very powerful.
Guys, if you haven't taken the assessment, I really would. I have my MBA students take the assessment. I have clients take it. Again, it's just the thing that hurts leaders the most. I I have not seen anything to discount or contradict this. The thing that hurts leaders the most are the things they don't see. It's their blind spots. This will help bring those to fruition. They'll help bring them up and you can see them more clearly. Page 23, spiritual gifts inventory. If you haven't taken that before, what I'm trying to do here, again, this is another data point. Look at alignment with passion. Look at alignment with what makes you come alive. Look at alignment with Myers-Briggs and your spiritual gifts tendencies. That's going to give you some more insight. Page 24. These last three are exercises that you can do alone. And the one thing exercise I will say has been the most profound exercise from my client's perspective they've ever done. I'm telling you guys, it's a great bit of data. I would highly recommend you do it. What this will, it feels a little bit like a eulogy because you're going to hear the thing that people see as your greatest gifting and talents. And every client that's done this has been so grateful that they did because of the feedback was so instructive. And I'll tell you this before I move on. Things will pop like neon lights from this exercise. So I really would encourage you to ask people this exercise. Page 25 is clarity. I laid the instructions out for you there as well. This is kind of a nice way to think about really what it is that you want. A lot of people struggle sometimes with, I'm not sure if, I'm torn here, I'm torn there. This little grid kind of can help you take some time to call out those details. And then the last one, I ask myself this question several times a year on page 26. And the 5 wishes is really, you're on your deathbed and someone comes to visit. 5 wishes that you'd wish you'd done. Again, back to passion, but these are all things designed to help begin to cull those things out.